It's chaos and why everything we do matters, in which you discuss how throughout history it's not always the best decisions or strategies that determine the outcome of major events, but rather something often overlooked. Explain what you're writing about.
Yeah, so the book, Fluke, is all about chaos theory applied to human society and to our own lives. And it opens with a story from 1926 where a couple goes on a vacation to Kyoto, Japan. And they fall in love with the city, and 19 years later, the husband ends up as America's Secretary of War. He's Henry Stimson. And he's in charge of deciding where to drop the atomic bomb. And the target committee keeps saying, we got to drop it on Kyoto. And he twice goes to President Truman and says, no, you can't destroy this. This is my favorite city in Japan. So the first bomb goes to Hiroshima because of a vacation 19 years earlier. The second bomb's supposed to go to Kokura. But there's brief cloud cover over the city, and so the bombers go to their secondary target of Nagasaki. So you have hundreds of thousands of people dying or living in two cities because of a 19-year-old vacation and a cloud. And most of what we think about when we imagine politics is this neat and tidy story, the narrative from A to B. And what I'm arguing is that chance, chaos, and randomness often actually diverts our trajectories much more than we imagine when we look closely at the event.
So Brian, the book is full of these sort of examples. It's a great read. One on the Civil War, a decisive moment for the Union Army. But let's turn to one that's more recent in the COVID-19 pandemic. And you talk to us about how that seemingly chaotic series of events led to the path that we all, as a globe, had to experience.
Yeah. So throughout history, flukes and chance events have diverted trajectories, but we've made ourselves more prone to them because we're hyper-connected and we've optimized the absolute limit. So now, when one person gets infected with a mutated virus, the entire world halts and goes into a standstill, right? 8 billion people are affected. That didn't used to happen, not nearly so quickly anyway. And you have this also with things like the Suez Canal, right? One boat gets a gust of wind, twists it sideways, $54 billion of economic damage. So one of the arguments that I'm making in the book is that through chaos theory and understanding some of these concepts, you can realize that we've made ourselves more prone to these chance events, these random occurrences. We've made it more likely that black swans will wallop us. And I think the 21st century bears that out. You have 9/11, the war in Iraq, the financial crisis. Then you have the Arab Spring, launched by a guy who lights himself on fire in central Tunisia, and the entire Middle East goes on fire. I mean, throughout the 21st century, we have been blindsided by these unexpected events. And one of the arguments I'm making in the book is that we have engineered a society in which Starbucks is unchanging, our daily lives are very routine and regular and ordered, but democracies are collapsing and rivers are drying up. And I'm explaining why that is and how we can potentially find more resilience to avoid it.
So, Brian, what's the next big fluke? You mentioned there COVID. What's the next big fluke that we should watch out for? And a kind of sidebar question. In a world of AI and automation, aren't we actually kind of automating out the chance of flukes because we're going to have data and predictability on almost everything?
Well, that's the great illusion. So AI is going to create the illusion of predictability and order, but it's going to embed, I think, some systemic risk into our world. And I think this is the stuff where, when you imagine the way that we live compared to, human ancestors long past, they had day-to-day chaos, right? They didn't know where they'd get their next meal or what would happen in their daily life. But their world was the same generation to generation. Parents taught children how to live, not the reverse. And now we've inverted that world, right? We have a world in which kids teach parents how to use technology.
I'm going to tell you the differences between then and now. Back then, people depended upon one another in case there was a calamity that hit either in the neighborhood, the community, or within their own lives. People supported one another. People was there for one another, kind of like the Mennonites. People don't do that no more. You know why? Because now all the conglomerates come in back in the early 1900s, and they persuaded everybody, well, heck, I don't need to be friendly to my neighbor. All I got to do is make sure I make the payment to Farm Bureau or State Farm or whoever. That way, if anything happens to me, I can depend upon them to take care of me. I can depend upon these conglomerates to take care of me. Well, that may be so to a certain extent, but whenever you have extortionists out there that makes promises that they're going to do this, this, and this, and then whenever you do get in trouble, they don't do none of the above, and some of them even walk completely backwards, that basically leaves you high and dry, then what good is the conglomerates that's come over to America and basically inundated and invaded our lives? It ain't. That's just like AI. One day AI is going to be disrupted. I don't know how soon, I don't know how quick, I don't know how necessarily, but it could be disrupted so much as even a direct solar flare. It could be basically destroyed of a MI bomb going off above the atmosphere that don't even have to hit the planet Earth. There's all kinds of ways that things could be disconnected and basically unreliable. And this is more and more that we're getting into each and every day. And I'm just going to use what has presently happened just within the past 10 days here in Northwest Tennessee. We've had a major cold front come down. Once more, these irregularities in seeing cold come down the way that it did. And now they're talking about it being up to 60, maybe even higher degrees along about the midweek, and rain coming in. Well, that's a difference of give or take about 60, maybe 70 degrees, depending upon where you was compared to where we was 10 days ago in going through the super cold. What did I do in the summertime? While I had a little bit of money, I went out here and I filled up all my 100-gallon tanks. They cost about $80 a piece. And I filled up 2 and put out here for this property, for this unit. And then I put another 3 out on the other unit. And it's a good thing that I did, because I had no idea that we was going to get basically, single-digit temperatures for the time length that we did. And I used up basically about a half a bottle here. And I used up almost a whole bottle on the other side because I didn't have auxiliary heat pertaining to electricity like I do over here. So I used up a whole tank. So it cost me $80 to save that trailer over there, and basically about $50 to save this trailer over here in the past 10 days on using propane, the bigger tanks. But now, if I didn't think ahead towards doing that, do you think anybody down the road was going to help me? You think anybody down the road was going to give me a call and say, hey, Dennis, you got all your tanks full? Do you need any help out there? No way. What I'm getting at is that our lifestyles has changed dramatically just within the past 25, 30 years. And to be quite honest with you, I really don't like what I'm looking at. And that may be where this individual is talking about right here, pertaining to all the unforeseeables. Because whenever you live in a digital run data era that we're living in right now, we're basically living in the unforeseeables, because we ain't never done this before. We're living in uncharted territory right now pertaining to all this data, pertaining to all the satellites, pertaining to all this social media, pertaining to all this artificial intelligence. We're living in uncharted territory, and the territory that we're charting into, I believe, is a prelude to what the Bible talks about pertaining to a one world government, or the New World Order. It's opening up doors for somebody with this type of power to come in and basically dominate and dictate not just the American people's lives, but the world in general. And I know that we have these superstitious ideals, kind of like Superman, that somebody's basically in control of a nuclear device, and they're basically holding a city or a country hostage. That could actually occur. Don't think that couldn't. That could actually occur, because we have evil in the world today such as we've never seen before, because of all these inventions, and people's hearts are still just as dark, and they're just as evil today as what they was whenever evil was evil. The only difference is that back then they didn't have all these gizmos and gadgets, and today they do. Today they do. And they can use these instruments and these gizmos and gadgets. They can weaponize these things against us. We see that again and again and again by people hacking and going into different back doors and basically holding towns and cities hostage, that if you don't do this, this, and this for me, this is what's going to happen. So we're seeing it more and more, and it's really, it's danger. And, if we're not smart enough to identify the pitfalls, well, then it ain't nobody's fault but our own.
in which we have
It's absolutely nobody's fault but our own, because nobody was willing to look before they leaped.
And I think this is the stuff where, when you imagine the way that we live compared to, human ancestors long past, they had day-to-day chaos, right? They didn't know where they'd get their next meal or what would happen in their daily life. But their world was the same generation to generation. Parents taught children how to live, not the reverse. And now we've inverted that world, right? We have a world in which kids teach parents how to use technology, in which we have computers that we don't all fully understand running systems. And the models we use are built on this idea of regularity. And I think we have actually embedded lots more risks into the future. What the next fluke is, I don't know. I mean, that's the nature of it, right? I think that's the entire idea. You can't predict things like a boat getting stuck in the Suez Canal and causing $54 billion of damage. And I think what is more important is to imagine how we might become more resilient by optimizing slightly less in the face of this uncertainty and building a little more slack into our systems, which I do not think is the driving standard in modern politics today.
The new book is entitled Fluke, Chance, Chaos, and Why Everything We Do Matters, and it goes on sale tomorrow. Brian Klaas, congratulations, and thank you very much for coming on the show this morning. And still ahead on Morning Joe, another split screen moment as voters prepare to cast ballots in New Hampshire.
So you may be asking, how come everything today matters versus what went on 35, 40, 50, 60 years ago? It's because now, today, everybody is under this same magnifying glass. And we have basically been tricked or talked into believing that if we sacrifice our privacy, our security is going to be that much better. And we're seeing once more these pitfalls of areas that is not safe, regarding a school shooter or some other event going on. And don't think for a second that people, especially those that are devious, don't think for a second that they're not intelligent enough to work around certain ideals or certain items that they know that if they was to expose themselves that way, they could possibly get caught. We're dealing with a society that has become embedded with evil thoughts and dishonesty. We're dealing with a society that even the people that we thought that we could trust, regardless whether it was Farm Bureau, State Farm, or even our own governments, to the point that now we're realizing that these areas can be compromised. The same way with AI. People don't think that AI could be shut down. People don't think that these inventions and ideals can basically all crumble just within a matter of seconds, but they can. And the Bible talks about these things towards throwing us off into great tribulation. It talks about he who have not known the depths of Satan, hold fast till I come, and to be thy faithful unto death. So what is around the horizon, regardless whether it be for the Americans, or it be for the Russians, or it be for the Chinese, or it be for the world in general, we have no idea. Like I said, it could be a direct shot with a solar flare that could absolutely shut us down and put us into the dark ages. Or it could be a meteor, it could be a major earthquake, or it could be a disease, or it could be some idiot that's got access to a nuclear bomb. It could be any and all the above. That's the reason why today, it is more essential for a person to have somewhat of a relationship with the Heavenly Father through the Lord Jesus Christ, because you don't know from one day to another, you don't know from 1 hour to another, you don't know from 1 second to another when Lucifer is going to lash out in some sort of way in bringing an earthquake, or bringing a catastrophic event, or bringing disease, or bringing a war, or bringing some idiot with a gun that's going to wind up shooting you. If there's ever been a time today that you needed to be alert and you needed to be prayed up and packed up and ready to go up, it is today. I cannot say that pertaining to it being that crucial. Since 9/11, the American world has changed. And in different parts of the world since 9/11, their world also changed. Our world also changed during Y2K, pertaining to going into 2000. That's whenever everybody basically become modernized, and that's whenever people was basically forced to go out here and get updated equipment pertaining to artificial intelligence. These are all trajectories heading somewhere. And one may be asking, well, where are we heading with all this? We're heading into a society, I think, personally, similar towards the Hunger Games. And eventually there's going to be an event that's going to happen to society that's going to basically break the will of our free will. Now, we can look at Russia, we can look at China, we can look at other communist-controlled countries and say, well, their free will has already done been broken. Yes and no. They're still alive, and they're still basically, even though there's 2 million people in concentration camps over in China, they're still feeding them and taking care of them. It could actually reach a state to where we would see global genocide of those who basically are either considered worthless, or those that basically is no longer an asset to society, that basically a monstrous force that could come down upon to the planet to where these things would be socially acceptable, not only here in America, but now throughout the whole world. That's where we're heading to. And if you don't believe me, watch some of the Terminator movies pertaining to the robot and artificial intelligence, towards, instead of us being in control of it can turn and be in control of us. We don't think that could happen, but even Elon Musk and Zuckerberg and some of them other high-tech people has said, yes, that is a possibility that this could happen, because we basically have created now a system that can teach itself. I don't know how Google has memorized the Bible. I don't know how Google has memorized every encyclopedia. I don't know how Google has memorized every library. And every now and then you may find a stumble, or you may find a hiccup. And trust me, whenever you do, and you put that out there to the general public, somebody will catch it. They'll fact check it real quick, and whenever they do, you'll probably get some sort of a memo like I recently just got, towards telling me that the information that I put out to the world on social media was incorrect. Well, I argue the fact pertaining to them telling me that, because I've done some more studies pertaining to the Sharia law, and I know for a fact that our Congress, basically in the early 1900s, made a law in the United States that Sharia law was against our law. Now, it may not be that way over in Africa. It may not be that way over in Argentina. It may not be that way in Syria or wherever. But in America, we had laws that prevented from us being invaded by this type of people. Even today, up in Michigan, Flint, Michigan, and places like that, there is so many Arabs that live in those areas that they've actually changed the street signs into Arabic. And don't say, well, that's not no big deal. Well, you know, that's kind of about what the Americans probably thought before they made an announcement right around 2000 that we was no longer a minority or a majority, that we've now got more imports or more implants over in America than we do true sovereign Americas. And whenever they started changing our phone systems over to the point you press 1 for English and 2 for Spanish, that right there should be a wake-up call to any true sovereign American citizen that yes, we are losing ground pertaining to us holding our own the way that our ancestors did before we ever come into existences. There was a purpose that they done what they done towards creating the atom bomb and stopping a lunatic from basically dominating the world. Today, you don't have to have an atom bomb. Today, all you got to be is smart, savvy, and be willing to break any violations or any rules or regulations out there to the point that you can basically hold the world hostage. We are walking into an area that spells danger, 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 red flags going off everywhere, and if we're not capable of identifying these things, and if we're not willing to talk about these things openly, well, then we're only setting not only ourselves up for a fall, but we're setting our children and our children's children up for a fall. Because it's all part of the plan towards what the Bible has already predicted in regards towards somebody gaining access to our lives and basically not just challenging us, but basically threatening us that if we don't do this, 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 and that, then we suffer the consequences on account of it. Whenever it talks in the Bible, those that did not accept the mark or did not worship the beast, pertaining to the system being the beast, that's exactly what it's talking about. It's talking about the system. And eventually, the system, I personally believe, will in fact take over mankind versus mankind being in control of it. It will be in control of us. Now you can say, well, that's just a figment of your imagination. You can say you've been watching too many sci-fi movies. You can say whatever you want to say, but everything links in a trajectory form of that occurring. In the meantime, it's leaving us very, very vulnerable, because once we become reliable on these institutions like insurance companies or Wall Street or the stocks or whatever, and then all of a sudden that gets pulled out from underneath us, what usually happens to people's lives? I'm not going to go as far to say that they'll be jumping out of windows like there was in 1929 or 1931 whenever the stock market crashed, but basically it will be the same type of scenario. And it may not happen on that level like it did in America whenever the stock market crashed, but it will be happening in different entities towards people basically having a whole valid, wonderful life today. And then 6 months from now, you're out on the streets because now the banking industry has done come in. They're foreclosed. You don't have a place to lay your head. Your automobiles, basically those that you did have, was taken from you. And I ain't talking about somebody that purposely violates their own self to the degree that they get out here and break laws like being a drunkard and they get those rights taken away from them. I'm talking about rights that forcibly gets taken from you, and you ain't really done nothing. You're just a victim of circumstances at the wrong place at the wrong time. You know, I can basically say the same thing towards right now and all these children that's basically growing up, these millennials, that, wow, if they're not willing to move away somewhere and going to a high rated place like either Nashville or Memphis or some of these other bigger cities, Atlanta, or even up in Chicago, where you know that you got a lot of the labor force industries up there. If you stay down here, it's a buddy-buddy system. And the thing about the buddy-buddy system with the computer, now, if you make a little bitty boo-boo, even if you make a boo-boo whenever you're basically a minor, those things can haunt you the rest of your life, which is basically a violation of our own standard laws, because by law, you're not supposed to be persecuted for the same crime again and again. It's called double jeopardy. And the way that the system is setting itself up now is that if you make a boo-boo, even though you may pay society for your crime or for your boo-boo, Now that boo-boo is out there to where everybody can see it, everybody can witness it, and they will hold it against you. Now, they'll say that in America, they don't have discrimination pertaining to that effect. I know for a fact that the law up here in Dresden, Tennessee, was using my background against me towards discrimination. Whenever you have basically the DA or the prosecuting attorney look at you and say, I'm not going to represent, but your brother over here, David, I will represent him. But what they didn't realize is that by them not helping Juby, they wasn't helping David. And because they wasn't helping David, David had too much pressure on him to the degree that David couldn't take it. David couldn't take all the pressure that was coming to him from his peers and for those that was wanting to basically destroy my life, wound up destroying his. That the law up in Dresden, Tennessee allowed, as far as I'm concerned. That's the reason why I say that they should be legitimately charged for dereliction of duty. Because you can look at the records and how many incidences happened either at 430 Beach Grove Road or 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. And this was way before I ever come back to Tennessee in 2014. You can look at all the incidences, and there was a slew of events that went on down here that should have been stopped way before Dennis Jackson come back to Northwest Tennessee in 2014. Way before. So basically, whenever I walked back into Northwest Tennessee, I walked back into a beehive that had been brewing that I heard a little bit about through various conversations with my brother or my dad or even my older brother. But I didn't realize that I was walking into a war zone, an absolute knockdown, drag out, Hatfield and McCoy type ordeal that the courts should have grabbed a hold of and solved in some form or fashion way before I even come back here. So basically, I was set up. I was set up by my brother and him not telling me the truth. He didn't tell me the truth about an organization right up the road here pertaining to the Wiccans, basically a castle with all these gargoyles. He didn't tell me that there was a group of people up here that moved in like that. He didn't tell me the extent of the aggravations or the torment or the terrorizing that various people in this community was doing to them. He only told me bits and pieces because if I would have known the whole perspective of things from A to Z on every level, I would have questioned whether or not I would have even come back here in 2014, even though my desires was to come back and help people in trying to build a recovery shelter to be able to help people's lives versus hurt people's lives. Now, even David made mention of the fact that Juby, if we was to open up and put a sign out here pertaining to a tavern or a gambling place or something like that, we wouldn't hear none of the above pertaining to anybody being against it. A matter of fact, they'd probably come out here and help you build it. Now, that was David's opinion during the war that was going on, that he was basically collateral damage that got caught in the middle of. And the thing about it is, all the incidences come to us. We did not go to them. And people like the Woodruffs, people like the Agees, people like I could go on and on and on with names that seen these events happening and was probably entertained by them. I can't say for sure that they was, but more than likely they was getting their kicks out of hearing about the disruptions that was going on down here on the property, because they for darn sure wasn't standing up and opposing it. They for darn sure wasn't standing in our corner every time we hired an attorney and went up to the courts and tried to explain what was going on. A lot of these people are sneaky, okay? And you take these these isolated areas down here in the country, first of all, they don't have jobs to go to because there ain't no jobs to go to. Most of our factories are shut down because our industrial has moved from the labor force here in America, and now they get their products cheaper by getting it overseas. I'm talking about your retail stores. I'm talking about even Lowe's. I'm talking about J.C. Penney. I'm talking about Sears. I'm talking about basically your clothing stores all the way down to the ones that manufacture the hammers. Because I guarantee you, I can go into Lowe's right now, and I can buy products for probably less than 10% of what I was buying on the Snap-on truck that would basically do the exact same thing. The exact same thing, regardless whether it was a skill saw or some sort of a cabinet toolbox or an impact wrench or a set of sockets. I can go right now. And of course, then you got all these other places that's even competing against their prices. That's even second rate to even what has been built, that you can even get those products for even that much more cheaper. So basically, the American people has been sold out. We've been sold downstream, and because of it, there is no jobs. So what else does people in the countryside have to do other than to spy on people, other than to talk about people, other than to be entertained by other people's problems? I had no idea that this part of the world that I was raised up in had turned so cold and callous until after I come back here. And the thing about it is, pertaining to neighborly respect, if the neighbors that was across the road, if they would have been respectful enough in realizing that their animals had created some sort of damage, if they would have come over here and made some sort of restitution, it would have been over with. But they didn't want to do it that way. They wanted to disrespect us. They wanted not to do the right thing. And they wanted it to escalate to the point that now we had to involve the police. Well, we thought the police was going to be in favor towards protecting us because we was the victims. But because Dennis Jackson already was out there and his name was out there and everybody had basically created this phony characteristic about Dennis Jackson towards him being a monster. Now the courts up here in Dresden, Tennessee, wasn't not only not going to protect Dennis Jackson, but they wasn't going to protect David. And I've always said this all along. It doesn't matter if I was a baby raper. It doesn't matter if I killed somebody's grandmother or grandfather, or if I robbed a bank, or if I killed a judge or whatever. Once I go before a panel of people, a court, and I get sentenced to my crime, and I pay for that crime, once I get out, other than children, I can see where they would be more critical on children, especially baby rapers and people that violate children. But once I get out, by and large, the courts, regardless whether it be the courts in Dresden or the courts in Union City or the courts in anywhere in America, is supposed to treat that citizen just the same as that citizen has never been in trouble with the law. That wasn't the case with my case. They was prejudice. They was discriminating. And whenever people tell you that they don't age discriminate, I got news for you. These factories that look at somebody, Walmart don't do it near as badly as what a lot of them do, because Walmart is more out there in the eyes of the open, and so is these other big retail stores. But they will discriminate you because you are either handicapped or you are of an age that they don't feel like that you would be adequate in the position. And don't think for a second that these conglomerates aren't calling the shots towards who they hire and who they fire pertaining to the keepers and the non-keepers. Well, now it's turned into a buddy-buddy system. And now the conglomerates are now having to eat the other conglomerates just to be able to stay alive. It goes down the food chain, where you got the whales eating the sharks, and then you got the sharks that's eating the bigger fish, and then you got the bigger fish that's eating the littler fish, and it goes all the way down to the food chain. Well, whenever the conglomerates no longer has the little guys that they can pick on and destroy that way, then they start picking on one another. And whenever that occurs, then you have a failed system, and then you're heading towards an Achilles heel that could be on a level unimaginable. If you'll add that with COVID, with all the COVID problems, if you'll add that with what went on during 9/11, if you'll add that with us being involved in the Afghanistan war for 10 years and spending approximately, I guess, $3 trillion, maybe more dollars on the Afghanistan war, and then walking away 11 days later, the same group of people that we was against winds up taking over the people that we was trying to support. These are all mistakes. These are all mistakes that is costing not only various people in those high positions, but it's costing us now. Especially whenever you drive around and you see these buildings that used to support 200, 300, 400 people. Some of them even had 2 shifts, and now either the building is gone or the building is still standing there, as Donald Trump said, that it looked like tombstones of buildings that you could fly around and see that used to employ 400 or 500 people, some of them even two shifts, that now employs nobody. So obviously we have been under the gun here in America, and we have been bought out or sold out, whichever way you want to look at it, sold downstream to the degree that now nobody has anything to do with their lives other than to sit around and either make up stuff about people or be entertained by the grief of others. And I said a long, long time ago, whenever the Jerry Springer show first come out up in Illinois, that my niece was working for at the time towards being a makeup artist, I said right then and there, whenever society starts basically either making fun or being entertained over people's grief, over people's misery, over people's sorrows, we as a society are taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back. And I've said this, and you probably heard me say this before, that it's the small fox that spoils the vine. If you get enough small foxes in your vineyard, and one of them chewing over here, and one of them chewing over there, and one of them's over here, and one of them's over there, and you can't see them, but you know they're in there, eventually, guess what's going to happen to your vineyard? It's going to die. It's going to die. Why is that? It's because you was looking for the big fox, and the big fox knowed that he was big enough that if he got over there, he was going to be captured. He's going to get caught. So what does the big fox do? He sends all the little foxes, all the baby foxes. That way they can get in there and they can chew this vine and chew that vine and chew over here and chew over there. And before long, now the master of the vineyard looks around and says, "My God, the whole thing is infestated and is dying." And that's basically what we're looking at here in America, because of these conglomerates that come in and basically made all kinds of promises that they was going to do this, and that, if this and that ever happened to us. And now we're realizing that, guess what? They're walking out. They're not fulfilling their commitments. Just like down there in Florida, my God, I couldn't tell you the amount of insurance companies that are forsaking and abandoning the people in Florida. You know why? Because now they're realizing Florida is a high risk, because it's on a peninsula and they're being bombarded with hurricanes almost every year. A matter of fact, they even go beyond that to the point that anybody that's living coastal, it don't matter if it's East Coast, West Coast, don't matter if it's down on the Southern Coast, now you're considered a high risk. And because of it, you pay more for your insurance. Don't think for a second that you don't. Because now the insurance company has to make up for those losses, because now you're in a high risk. The thing about the high risk situation with the insurance companies, and I'm just going to use Mississippi as an example, whenever Katrina hit down there, they didn't just raise their insurance policies down in Gulfport and Biloxi and down towards past Christian. They didn't just raise their prices on the coastal liners, they raised their prices all over the whole state of Mississippi. Everybody in the state of Mississippi now had to pay part of the problem towards those that was living in a high um, basically a high risk area of being damaged with either tornadoes or hurricanes. And these insurance companies has got to the point now that they want to prorate everything. You know, back whenever I was in the auto body industry, it got to the point that they wanted you to actually put on a used top or a used quarter panel. Well, guess what? Those tops and those quarter panels, you got to cut the welds out, and you got to take an air hammer just to be able to get in there and dismantle them from the fuselage that's already there. In the meantime, you'll do more damage to the panel than what it would have been if you'd have just repaired the old one. These insurance companies has lost their freaking minds. Now, I can understand that they don't want to replace a brand new hub or a brand new bearing on a vehicle that's got 70,000 miles on it. And if they do, you got to pay the difference, just like a battery. I can understand that. But whenever they go to the extent that now they're asking for basically for somebody to pull a bunny rabbit out of their hat to satisfy them, because at the end of the year they're looking for profits and gains. That way they can buy more vacation homes. That way they can go on more vacations or put their kids or their grandkids or their nieces and nephews in college. You've went too far. You've went entirely too far when it comes to the middleman, the small man, basically taking it on the cheek. I'm fortunate that I had enough sense to go out here and get some 100-pound tanks and fill them up just in case of a tragic, bad event that basically spearheaded down through America with this cold weather. I can remember a time whenever it would get cold, it would stay cold. You know why? Because the forces of cold, that energy was more effective, and because the forces was more energetic, it basically kept the heat from coming from the south up to the north during the winter months. That way, whenever spring come, it all changed over at one time, and we didn't have to worry about going through these cycles of hot, cold, cold, hot, hot, cold, cold, hot. Well, every time that does that, you take a risk on now form storming. Major storms forming. Because basically, whenever you have the hot compiling to the cold, it's going to be a separation that can basically lead into either the hot or the cold start rolling up like a piece of carpet. Once that carpet gets so heavy or gets so big, then that part of it drops down, but the speed has not diminished. The speed is still there, and that's whenever you basically have a tornado that can be either a temporary small tornado like a category 1, or all the way up to a category 6. Because now they're figuring out, especially on the other side of the hemisphere, on the other side of the parts of the world past the equator, that some of those storms are basically reaching levels of 300 plus miles an hour pertaining to their typhoons. They're hurricanes that they call something different over there, because instead of them turning clockwise, they turn counterclockwise. We are going to see storms intensify even more so than what we're seeing today, because of what humanity is doing to the planet, and plus what humanity is doing to the upper loft of the atmosphere above our heads. We did not pay enough attention to the professionals that was telling us, going all the way back into the Carter era, whenever they walked into the White House and they tried to explain to the White House during Carter's era of what was going to occur. And because of the lobbyists, the money people that was saying, oh no, none of this stuff is true, none of this stuff is true, keep drilling, keep drilling, keep drilling. Just like Donald Trump talks about drill, 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 drill. You keep drilling, and you see what kind of consequences that it brings on down the road. If you think things is bad now pertaining to the irregularities, pertaining to the weather, you ain't seen irregularities. You ain't seen bad weather. I actually watched a scientific show back, I guess I was probably in my 20s, so that put it probably back around in the either late 70s or the 80s, where somebody had made up this movie pertaining to storms being so violent that whenever electricity pertaining to lightning, whenever it would hit a house, it wouldn't just hit the corner of the house and explode it or catch it on fire. It would actually disintegrate the whole house. It would disintegrate the house and disintegrate everything in the house. If that's what you want to see in the future, that your children are going to have to deal with, continue to do what you're doing, continue to stay on the trajectory that we're on towards draining all the oil out of the ground and basically contaminating our upper loft pertaining to our solar system above our heads. That's what we're going to experience, or they're going to experience, that one day Papa, one day your granddaughter, your grandson, or your great-grandson, great-grandson is going to pull on your shirt tail and they're going to say, how come, Papa, you let these things get this way? And you're going to be standing there speechless during the day of judgment while they're sitting there wondering how come you allowed for this to occur. How come? How come you did not listen and take the signs appropriately towards changing your trajectory? And now look what not only we're having to deal with today, but look what possibly they're going to have to deal with even more so in the future because of greed and selfishness and stupidity. Greed is the main insight towards everybody wanting to jump on the bandwagon, towards thinking that they can drill, and there wasn't going to be no consequences for the drilling. And one other thing I want to make mention pertaining to the people that are taking on the leadership of basically trying to run the world, whenever it comes to these EVs, electrical vehicles, because this cold snap come down the way that it did, it caught people unaware, especially those that couldn't house their automobiles in garages, and they was left out into the elements in single digits or even below single digits, that basically hampered or dampened or even damaged some of the batteries out there, the bigger batteries, to the point that they couldn't hold but about half of the current that they ordinarily hold. Well, guess what? They should have put some sort of a sleeping blanket, a heated sleeping blanket on the system, or they should have had it some way or another where all you had to do was plug it up during your charging station at home, and that battery, you could flip a switch and that battery would stay warmed up around the components of that battery. In other words, you was creating a controlled environment around the battery. I've known that all my life, that batteries are very, very sensitive whenever it comes to extreme heat or extreme cold. Because if you got a battery that's already weak, you got a battery that's already struggling to stay alive, either excessive heat could basically boil all the content out of the battery, or extreme cold can basically kill it. That's the reason why up north, whenever I was just a young lad at the age of 4, 5, 6 years old, before we moved down to Tennessee, it wasn't nothing uncommon for Dad in the dead winter time. Sometimes it'd get like 10 below, 20 below, not counting the wind chill. He would take the batteries off the automobiles and bring them in the house. And then in the morning, he'd take that same battery and put it on the vehicle. That way that battery was fully charged. I've never seen so much stupidity whenever it comes to people trying to rule the world, and they can't even rule their own lives. They've got all this book sense pertaining to this education, but they hadn't got enough sense to get out of the rain. They hadn't got enough sense to put some sort of a system involving these automobiles. It's got these $4,000 and $5,000 batteries, basically of what it costs to be able to replace a battery. They didn't have enough sense to put some sort of a safety system on there, that if you was in an area that was going to turn off extremely cold, that basically all you had to do is flip a switch and it would stay warm. Same way with these areas like in Arizona that gets up to 115, 117 degrees. That will literally fry a EV automobile, electric vehicle. It'll fry a battery. If it'll fry a regular 12-volt battery or a regular motorcycle battery or a lawnmower battery, don't you think it'll also damage one of them big batteries that cost $4,000 or $5,000? Sure it will. So what do they need to do? They need to, first of all, encase that battery in some sort of a styrofoam system that basically is the same thing as you use to put ice in to keep your drinks cold in the summertime. People don't know this. In the dead wintertime, I'll take items that I don't want to get cold, such as batteries, liquids, etc., and I'll put them in an old freezer somewhere. That way I know that it is basically a controlled environment. Because if that freezer or that insulation package will keep the heat out, don't you think it'll also keep the cold out? If it'll keep the cold in or the heat in, don't you think it'll do just the very opposite whenever you want it to? So all these people that throw away all these coolers and all this stuff that is insulated, they're throwing away good money, because they could use it, if it wasn't nothing else, to store dog food in or cat food in to keep the mice and the critters from it. There's all kinds of stuff out there that people can do, but they don't have enough sense to get out of the rain. Why? Because now we have sat by and we've said, okay, y'all wanted to run the show, y'all got a PhD, y'all got a diploma hanging on your wall, you're supposed to be smarter than me, so you run the show for us. Well, we put our lives in these people's hands. And now look what it's gotten us. It has gotten us empty buildings throughout the country of areas that used to have strong labor forces, that now, because all your retail stores is going overseas and basically stabbing the American people in the back, now the buildings that used to stand there that had machinery in it is now shut down or completely gone. So you can't tell me that the American people has not been taken advantage of. They have taken it on the cheek again and again and again, just like the smallpox, and now we're beginning to see the damages all over that. Wow, it didn't take a big fox to go in and ruin the vineyard. Now, because of the little ones, and it was so many of them, now the vineyard is dying anyways. People are going to have to be vigilant. They're going to have to be able to use their own heads whenever it comes to being preppers, whenever it comes to people expecting the unexpected, regardless whether it be entirely too hot or entirely too cold. I am fortunate that God gave me that sense to be able to help protect myself, because I have struggled all my life. I have struggled to maintain my independence. Ever since I was 2 weeks old, of having a polycystic kidney removed up in St. Teresa's Hospital in Antioch, Illinois, I have had to fight and struggle and fight and struggle and fight and struggle, either because of this condition or that condition, either because of a messed up dad with post-traumatic stress disorder, or being raised up in a community at the time that the people either didn't care or wasn't capable of understanding what type of damages that it was doing to the family and to the children of that family. I've learned that as an adult, nobody is going to rescue you. Nobody's going to save you. Nobody's going to take care of you. Nobody is going to be there to wipe your nose and to clean the snot out of your nose whenever all hell breaks loose in your life. Now, there's one other thing I want to make mention of. This past summer, because of me having to be out so much extra money on expenses, and plus hiring a helper to come in here and help me build wheelchair ramps and lifts and stuff like that, I had to put an extra set of tires on my car. I had to fill up all those gas tanks that I was telling you about, preparing for the winter. I basically pushed my means very, very close to almost getting in the red with one of my banks that I deal with. If I would have called up my son and explained to him, with him making basically 100 G's a year, I don't know what his wife makes, if she makes anything, I don't know his financial circumstances over there is what he's doing. But if I would have called up my son and said, son, I'm going to have $1,000, or I'm going to have $2,000 because I've gotten in the hole and I didn't realize my lawnmower was getting bad and I was going to have to replace it 5 or 6, 7, 8, 10 years down the road after I bought it new, back in 19 or 2020, whatever. These younger kids today, these millennials, they don't want complications in their lives. They want everything to be simplified. And if I would have called my son up and said, I'm financially strained, please help, the next thing you know, I would have had to worried about him by saying, well, Dad, why don't we just sell all this and why don't you just go in a home? That way your check would basically pay for the home that you was going into, old folks home, a retirement home, whatever kind of category that you want to put it in. That way, out of sight, out of mind, no problems, simplify things, and go on about your life. That's the reason why I did not call my son and let him know that I had pushed myself to the limits and that I needed some extra cash. Is because I was taking a chance in calling him up and telling him that, and all of a sudden the very independence that I had been fighting for all along now suddenly gets taken from me because I'm at the age to where I'm basically no longer looked upon as being an asset to society, but now I'm looked upon as being a liability. And that liability does not just happen pertaining to looking at the masses, but it happens pertaining to independently. And that's the reason why so many children today, they're not going to have it. You know, they're just not going to have dad or mom or grandma affecting their lives that way. And basically, they'll make a decision for you. And the next thing you know, they're auctioning off all the stuff that you had, even though it ain't bringing but pennies on a dollar. And now you're having to live in some sort of a substitute place that you'd rather not be in, much less live in. That's where we're heading with all this, my friends. And to be quite honest with you, it's actually irking that we have all these people that's supposed to be controlling the things that we're having to deal with that are letting us down again and again and again. We're not being taught properly. We're not being schooled properly. We're not being educated properly. And basically, the conglomerates take care of the conglomerates. The rich take care of the rich. The 1%ers take care of the 1%ers, while the rest of the 99%ers, guess what happens to us? You got it. We get sifted, and next thing you know, we fall through the cracks, and the next thing you know, the life that we was accustomed to or that we wanted now has been jeopardized, and now we're either out on the streets towards being homeless, towards being a beggar, or having to resort in other means towards illegal activities, maybe selling drugs, maybe selling your body as a prostitute. But now we're forced into areas that we should not have to be forced into. Because why? Because people like that right there that you're looking at, that's mighty and powerful and rich, and I'm not saying this directly or personally, but I'm just saying as a metaphor that it's the wealthy and the rich people that are going to continue to have what they have pertaining to the hases, and the has-nots can basically kiss their tails, because they'll get on TV and they'll make all kinds of void promises, and they'll tell us, oh, we care about your family. Oh, we care about those potholes in front of your house. Oh, we care about your children's education. Oh, we care about where this country goes. And in reality, the only thing they cared about was themselves. Now, we have been bamboozled again and again and again for the past 30 plus years, and my question is this: when is society going to wake up pertaining to these, I'm going to call them reptilians, cold-blooded animals that could care less about anybody's life other than their own? And to be quite honest with you, it's gotten so bad now that even a lot of those don't necessarily care for their own, and even some of those don't even care about their own lives. They're miserable human beings, and they want everybody else's life to be miserable. I've said this before. During World War II, we was dealing with a society of people that cared about life, that cared about the future of life. Today, those concerns are steadily dwindling. Those concerns are steadily being abolished or now taken away. And whenever it gets to the point that we become so calloused that we cannot even sit down and reason among ourselves towards these variables or towards these dangers that we're looking at, then we are a doomed society. We are a doomed society, and you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see it coming over the horizon. Now, they'll lie to you. These people on TV right here, and I'm not picking them out directly pertaining to their occupations, because they're basically news anchor people, or they're commentators that want to tell the news. But so many of them want to tell only their version of it. And basically the bottom line, whenever it comes to them being able to relate to the common old Joe out here, they can't relate to them. You know, I think the average person in Tennessee makes about $30,000 a year. $30,000 a year that they got to work, maintain, wear out automobiles, put on tires, pay for insurance, pay their taxes, and keep the lights on. That is not no money. That is not no money. If you're not making at least 65 to 80 G's, 80K a year, you're going in the hole, my friends. I don't care if you're living in Tennessee or if you're in Timbuktu, you're going in the hole. Now, in the meantime, all the senior citizens are those that's already been unfortunate towards having to rely upon the government pertaining to government aid. They're basically on a fixed income. And whenever they tell you that the economy is straightening out, the economy is no longer what you would call escalating and going up. But as far as those same products that before COVID we could buy for this price, and now they're this price, they haven't went back down. And you know what? They're not going to go down. You know why? Because the big conglomerate says, you know what? This is what it's going to take for us to keep the lights on. This is what it's going to take for us to maintain our business structure. Well, in the meantime, you got the unfortunate of the most unfortunate pertaining to those that are already on a fixed income that now are being crippled, beat upon, violated, and some of them even destroyed. Because I guarantee you, you can go to the homeless centers and you can start questioning people pertaining to their motives, and you can sit down and ask them, did you intend to be where you are today in having to depend upon some sort of a homeless shelter for you to survive? And if they got any sense at all, I'm going to say 7 out of the 10 will tell you, no, we did not plan this out to the degree that we wanted to become homeless, that we wanted basically for our houses to be taken from us and our cars and our families and all the above. And now we're basically sitting high and dry and we're holding the bag and the bag's empty. 7 out of 10 that's got any sense at all will tell you, no, I would have preferred to have maintained my life, had my automobiles, my wife, my husband, our dogs, our children, our home, our lives. 7 out of 10 will tell you that this has been crippling to their lives. But now they are caught, they are captured in between a hard place and a rock, in the degree that now, because of AI, and now everybody knows that Jim wrote bad checks to the point that he had to go to jail over, or Sally got caught with the 3rd DUI and she had to spend $11.29 in the jail. Now everybody can view those records. And don't think for a second that we don't live in a buddy system, especially in the South. Probably more so in America than ever has been, because they'll look at you towards you either being a liability or they'll look at you towards you being an asset. And if these conglomerates see, whenever you walk in the door, that instead of you being an asset to them, you're going to wind up being a liability to them, they will find ways of discriminating against you. They'll tell you that they don't, but they will find ways of discriminating against you and basically putting you out in the pasture to dry. In other words, they're all washed up. Well, whenever you have a society with all the baby boomers, to the degree that now there's a flood of them going to the pastures, But the money is no longer there. And instead of us maintaining our level of structure in regards towards the White House spending $5 trillion but only taking in $3 trillion a year, you have a depleted, broken, abolished system that is on its way out, especially if we don't have enough sense to either see the things, discuss about the things, and try to work our way from it actually occurring. And to be quite honest with you, whenever it comes to our government being $36 trillion in debt, which, COVID had a big thing to do with it, but it all basically started during the presidency of Ronald Reagan, whenever they decided that they was no longer going to back the good old American dollar bill with gold. We have reached a state in our society being $36 trillion in debt and only valued at a little over $100 trillion in debt. We have reached a state in society that it's no longer if the system fails, but it's just a matter of when the system fails. Because now we're on a trajectory of bankruptcy. And unless somebody can pull a bunny rabbit out of their hat to be able to come up with a solution to all these problems over here that the blind has basically led the blind into, we are on our way towards devastation. Politically, financially, emotionally, devastation. Devastation that if I myself don't get to live through, my children pertaining to my son and possibly my grandchildren, which hopefully I'll have more than just one granddaughter, but they're going to have to inherit these things that now we have basically fumigated. We have basically been a part of towards creating that. Talk about unfair. I mean, it's one thing to say, you know what, Grandpa, there's no longer a factory down the road where I can go and make, good money and put aside and have a dream and a desire towards basically buying a house and having a family and a home and basically having a decent life. I don't have those things no more, Grandpa, if I stay around here. So now, what does the grandson or the granddaughter got to do? They got to move away from Grandpa. That way, Grandpa and Grandma don't have any type of bonding relationship with their children. It's a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice that's being made that didn't have to be made if our leadership would have done the proper and right things. Like I said, I personally believe that whenever the assassination of Kennedy happened, that from then on our politicians started walking backwards. From then on our politicians started giving the farm away. And from then on we started going south. And we sure enough started going south whenever Ronald Reagan come into power and they was going to basically scrap In God We Trust off the American dollar bills, and they was basically going to end any type of discipline pertaining to spanking your children or saying prayer in school, and we was going to abolish towards having to have gold bullion to back up our currency. Now I just said a mouthful, and it didn't cost you a thing. And you got the opportunity, if you do listen to this video that I'm putting out, that you can either accept it towards it being the truth, or you can reject it. Now, the next question is this: if you accept the things that I'm telling you about towards it being truthful, now you have another choice. What are you going to do about it? You can either become stagnated, like the baby boomers have showed themselves towards being for the past 30 plus years, and basically putting your hands up underneath your hips and not doing nothing, basically being like an ostrich and sticking your head in the sand and acting like it's out of sight, out of mind, even though you know what's going on. Or you can get up and you can explain these things to the money people, regardless whether it be your grandfather, your grandmother, or whoever, and you can sit down and tell them the plan of action is upon us. The time of choosing is upon us. And if we don't choose, and trust me, by not activating your actions, you have made a choice. You have made a choice to remain silent and not do nothing. And keep in mind, by not doing nothing, there's going to be consequences. There's going to be consequences. So people like me, you can degrade me, you can demoralize me, you can demonize me all you want. You can say, wow, this guy's got a freaking problem, don't he? Wow, this guy here, he's a this, or he's a that, or he's a this way or that way. Well, you can make up all the excuses that you want, and you can play the blame game and blame everybody else other than yourselves. But the fact of the matter is, the buck stops with us. Accountability starts and stops with us. And if you don't think so, hang around, keep your hands under your hips, don't do nothing, because it's coming near a neighborhood near you of harsh, hard times. I can't say it, I can't explain it, I can't dictate it any better than that. It's going to be a tough road to hoe in the next 7, 8, 10 years. A tough road to hoe. In other words, people are going to have to clamp down, they're going to have to tighten their belts, but at the same time, they're going to have to roll up their sleeves, and they're going to have to get a little muck on them. They're going to have to get a little dirt on them. They're going to have to actually get out there and try to figure out what is the solution to the problem. Now we've generated this many people over here in this area. If we're going to have a relationship with our grandsons and granddaughters pertaining to our family, we're going to have to invent some sort of a plan to where they can still maintain their lives in going out here and buying what they want or buying what they need and being loyal to that company and still living out their lives the way that they're supposed to live out their lives. Or we can continue to keep our mouth shut and not say nothing and let it fester. Keep kicking the can down the road, just like the White House does every time that they raise the debt ceiling. Raise the debt ceiling. I think the debt ceiling's been raised almost 80 times since 1980 towards shutting down the government and basically canceling out on services that the American people rightly deserve. Rightly deserve. That are now being forfeited.
John set it up for us. A lot going on in New Hampshire over the past.
I ain't worried about all that. See, that's all strictly politics. They're leaning, and I'm sure they probably that's what feeds these narratives whenever it comes to these commentators on these channels. That's what basically feeds them. That is part of the system. I'm sure Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and all these other people probably get irritated whenever they look at my social media platform and I do not allow for commercials to come on into my social media platform, because then I would be doing it for another reason other than to be trying to help people. I could actually be accused of, well, you're doing it to make 3 cents off of every time somebody views one of your videos. That's not what I'm doing it for. I'm doing it to try to help the people to open up their eyes to realize where we are today. And I don't want to be falsely accused
For our conservative Republicans who don't want to stab Israel in the
of somebody that wants to accuse me and saying, well, the reason why that you done this or done that was because you was being motivated off of the good old American dollar bill, which goes back down to greed. No, I don't want people. If I got to beg for money like a beggar out on the streets, if I got to try to bring up some sort of schemes that if you'll send me $10, I'll send you this prayer cloth and all your desires, and you'll live like a king here upon the earth. If I've got to come up with scams and schemes just to be able to basically get people to do the right things whenever it comes to them hearing about me and trying to help the ministry go forward in successfully succeeding in seeing a revival in peace and utopia one day pertaining to the meek inheriting the earth, if I got to beg you or threaten you to do that, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to come up with a scheme. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to try to manipulate you just so that it will better my cause in that format. Now, if you can't come to me eye to eye, man to man, person to person, and saying, Juby, this is what we want to do for you in helping the ministry succeed and go forward on. If you can't do that in a respectful, logical way, well, then you know what? I'd rather you just stay at home. Because if you're waiting for me to scam you or trick you, if you're waiting for me to manipulate you, if you're waiting for me to beg for your assistance, it ain't going to happen. It ain't going to happen. I've already done put the word out there. I've already done sowed the seeds, and now I'm waiting for those seeds that I have sowed to come back in fertilization and actually witnessing a harvest. That's the reason why I come back to Northwest Tennessee, because I know that I had been dealing with these people again and again and again towards putting out all this material to all these different churches, and now I'm waiting on the harvest. But I'm still not seeing a harvest. I'm still not seeing a revival. I'm still not seeing people coming up with engineering ideals towards, wow, we can create this item, this, and this, and put it on the retail shelves and compete with our competitors overseas, and everybody be hunky-dory. I'm still not seeing that. I'm still not seeing the barriers being destroyed, regardless whether it be the barriers of child abuse or the barriers of neglect or the barriers of this or that or that or this. I'm still not seeing that. And because of it, maybe we have went over the Rubicon. Maybe we have went to the point of no return. Maybe we are a doomed society of the very instillment that the Luciferian Lucifer wanted to put in people's hearts and in people's minds, to the point that America basically falls to its knees. And if it hadn't fallen to its knees already, eventually it will fall. Because you don't spend $5 trillion every year and only taking in $3 trillion, and then you got to deal with all these unforeseeables pertaining to diseases, disasters, man-made disasters, force of nature disasters, and think that we're going to be able to continue to be self-sustainable, because we're not. And I know that the things that I'm talking to you right now about all this stuff is probably either devastating or even depressing to a lot of people whenever they hear people like me talk. But you got to have people like me to talk in the room. That way we can not just look at one angle, but we can now look at all the angles. We can now look at all the sides in making decisions for ourselves towards what is the best decision. What do we need to do, not only for ourselves, but for our children and our children's children? And if we're not willing to do that, my friends, democracy has already been killed. Democracy, as we know it, has already been stifled. It has already been abolished. If we can't sit and talk and discuss the right measures in what we're supposed to do and what we're not supposed to do. These things are very, very concerning to me. And they're not necessarily concerning for me because of me, but they're concerning for me because of the children and all the generations below me that really and truly don't deserve this. They don't deserve to inherit our problems. They don't deserve to inherit all this gun violence. They don't deserve to inherit all these things that are going on today that all could have been prevented.
On the broken glass that's all over the place. And so we've been bringing congressional delegations through. I've been bringing Republicans through. And now this is the highest ranking member of the Biden administration, the Secretary of Education, to come through the building, because that building, within the horrors of those walls, are lessons to learn on how we can keep our kids safe in schools. Some of these failures that we saw happen in Parkland, we saw repeated again in Uvalde. And so I'm hoping to have a conversation with the secretary. I'm hoping to show the secretary that in addition to doing stuff on gun violence prevention, we also need to be doing stuff on school safety, and we need a national standard on school safety, and we need a national standard when it comes to responding to these events.
You know, I mean, it's one of the reasons why there's such hypocrisy now with people who call themselves pro-life. While they let women die, and like you talked about in the 7 o'clock hour, they let women die on the operating table, or let women go out and die and say they can't
sterilize them.
and then or sterilize them, and then you look at what happens here, what has happened here. I mean, more children. Children die
Carnage.
of guns. It's the #1 cause of death for children in America today. Who's pro-life? Who's pro-life that supports the continued proliferation of weapons of war? The answer, let me help you here. Nobody. Nobody. Weapons of war. And Jared, I want to thank you so much. I know our good friend Fred Gutenberg would appreciate, and I'm sure he'll be a part of it, appreciate what you're doing today. We think about Jamie all the time, and the others who lost their life that day, and we're so grateful that you are drawing attention to this, and hopefully move us out of this madness where we can start actually being pro-life towards children who are actually breathing and living today.
Democratic Congressman Jared Moskowitz, thank you very much for being on this morning.
You wonder how come the children are basically slicing their wrist or taking a bunch of pills or putting a gun to their mouth. It's because they don't see a future. They understand that the elders has failed, and we have been backstabbed pertaining to all the retail stores, now going overseas, rather getting stuff that the quality isn't half the quality is what the American quality used to be, and basically there's nothing left other than to sit around and make fun and be entertained by other people's grief and misery. We have turned into a very, very sick society, my friends, and if you're not willing to see that and understand that, like I said, the people, the majority of them, the commentators up there that's making $100,000+ a year to sit up there and look pretty and act smart, they cannot relate to the average person's life down here. That would be like saying that I can relate to a woman having birth, even though I'm a male, and even though I've never had birth. You know as well as I do, I cannot fully relate to a woman having birth. Now, I can tell you that I can, but I'm telling you a lie. I'm telling you a lie if I can tell you that I can relate to a woman having birth. Because I've never had birth. I've never been able to birth a child. And I guess the first male that does, especially if it's on a natural order, will probably wind up in Ripley's Believe It or Not and probably be a billionaire. Because it's not normal. It's abnormal. And I'm tending to wonder if that's where all this is heading, is that we're taking the things that we used to look at in my generation towards being right or normal, and now we're twisting them around towards them being abnormal or wrong. In other words, it's reached a plateau in America to where now the heterosexual people are basically left in a corner somewhere, to where now they look like that they're not just old fogies, but now they're looked upon as being weird. Now they're looked upon as being a freak, because now the rest of society has turned towards being LGBTQ, or men becoming women or women becoming men, and now because there's more of them than it is of the heterosexual, now we're looked down upon because now we're not like them. And if people can't understand these analogies that I'm putting out there, then obviously they're either incapable of understanding these things, or they just don't care. As long as it's not affecting their lives in some sort of way or form, they really don't want to hear people like me. Thing about it is affecting their lives. Whenever you go to a grocery store and you're paying basically, give or take, about 15 to 25% more for the same product that you was buying before COVID, before pre-COVID, it's affecting your life. Whenever you pump your gas, and instead of gasoline being less than $2 a gallon like it was during the presidency of Donald J. Trump, And now at the end of the month, at the end of the year, you don't have money to put tires on that vehicle. You don't have money to actually fill up those extra propane tanks in case there's a cold front comes down. You don't have money to buy a new battery or your kids' new shoes or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have been entrapped. The people have been entrapped. And now, hopefully, they'll wake up to this entrapment, and now hopefully they will hold the people that should have prevented these things from happening accountable. And all that I can do is try to tell you the best advice and what we need to do. And as far as me making you do what you should do, I can lead a horse to the water trough, but I cannot make him drink. But I tell you what I can do. I can tell you ahead of time what the consequences are going to be if you don't. That's where my leadership comes in at. That's where my responsibilities come in at, towards giving you the ultimatums and telling you, okay, if you don't do this, then this is what you're going to look forward to. It's kind of like the laws of drinking and driving or speeding. Okay, you don't have to abide by the laws of speed. You don't have to abide by the laws of drinking and driving. But I tell you what you will have to do. Whenever you get caught, you'll have to suffer the consequences for it. You'll have to suffer the consequences because you did not abide by the rules. You thought that you was either above the law or you just didn't have no respect for the law, and because of it, now you're left out in the cold. But I still say that the computerized system of today pertaining to the internet, artificial intelligence, social media platform, has brought more of a problem into our lives than a solution to it, because now people get a hold of that information and they judge people off of it and they compartmentalize people off of it, and then they hold that against those people. Just like Johnson, the prosecuting attorney up in Dresden, Tennessee. He know that I had had some scrapes with various law enforcement agencies, regardless whether it was in Kentucky, Oklahoma, or Atlanta, and even Nashville, Tennessee, pertaining to a bogus warrant that was put out pertaining to a rabbi. He know this. And because of it, I was being targeted. And even though he may not have been actually targeting me towards wanting to hurt me, by him not being adequate in doing his job in protecting us down here, that was another way of harming me. Because now we have been thrown to the wolves towards defending ourselves, but yet now, if it gets so bad that I got to take the law into my own hands, guess what's going to happen to Juby? He just got through shooting himself in the foot, because now the law is looking for an excuse to bury me, and now they've got the excuse. And how many other people's lives out there are basically going through similar circumstances? And you know they're out there, and you know that you're on paper, and it's just a matter of time before you're going to go back through that recycling bin again, to the point that you've been captured. You've been captured and you've been entrapped, and now you don't have no other choice other than to suffer, or to do the other, which is go out here and be a lawbreaker and take a chance on wind up being in front of that same judge again. It's awful.
Because of COVID precautions, and a source telling NBC News Trump had been planning on testifying. Our Yasmin Vasugian's outside the courthouse. Von Hilliard is standing by in New Hampshire. Also with us, former Assistant Manhattan District Attorney Catherine Christian, along with Caroline Polisi, former federal and white-collar defense attorney. Yasmin, why this delay? What's going on?
So I'm just going to ask you to excuse me, Anna, as we're talking throughout these next couple of minutes or so. I'm going to keep glancing down at my phone because we have dictation coming from inside the courtroom as to what's actually happening. But we are getting word, as you just mentioned, that the trial, in fact, has been delayed until tomorrow, resuming at 9:30 a.m. for a couple of different reasons. It's because COVID has, it seems, struck again. Alina Habba, the former president's attorney, along with another of the president's attorneys as well, feeling symptomatic. Alina Habba's parents tested positive for COVID. She so far has tested negative, but she is feeling symptomatic. One of the jurors as well said they were feeling symptomatic as well as they were on their way, making their way into Manhattan. So they turned around and went home to go get tested. So because of all of that, because of COVID, which so many of us know quite well at this point, and those symptoms, the trial has been resumed, it seems, or has been delayed until tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m., in which it will resume. Throughout the day, they're going to be setting up a phone line in which they're going to be reporting test results to make sure nobody else tests positive in the next 24 hours or so. We're going to have to wait and see actually what happens, because you bring up obviously the fact that the former president may be testifying. Listen, he has said this before, and then they pulled the plug at the very end. That is still very much in question. First and foremost, Carol's attorneys have to wrap their case here. We're going to be hearing from Roberta Myers when, in fact, they resume tomorrow, the editor-in-chief of Elle Magazine, who will likely speak to the importance of E. Jean Carroll's column at Elle Magazine. And then the question of, will the former president testify or will he not testify? There's a lot of restrictions in place for him. He cannot, for instance, get on the stand and say, I did not assault E. Jean Carroll.
Let's go forward here. Well, I can't go forward. All right, let's go to something else real quick.
Dozen people, most of them relatives of hostages, storming a meeting of the Finance Committee inside the Knesset, Israel's parliament, demanding that government officials there do more to secure the release of hostages. There are also families of hostages camped out outside of the Prime Minister's residence, and today the Prime Minister actually met with the families of some of those hostages. And what he told them, as he rejected just yesterday this proposal from Hamas that would somehow see the withdrawal of all troops, the release of Palestinian prisoners, and something that the Israeli Prime Minister described as untenable because it would see the deaths of Israeli soldiers in Gaza as something that would have happened in vain. The Prime Minister said that he has his own proposal, an Israeli position that has been put on the table, although he wouldn't get into detail on exactly what that is. But it is clear that there is a lot of movement right now in the Middle East in the direction of trying to secure either another deal to secure the release of hostages, or perhaps even something broader, so a grander kind of bargain here that would potentially see a longer-term ceasefire in Gaza, a longer-term solution and an end to the war there. But we are, of course, very far from that actually happening, but certainly a lot of activity in the region, both from the United States, from Egypt, from Qatar, but also a lot of domestic pressure here internally weighing on the Israeli Prime Minister, pushing him towards that next deal.
All right, Jeremy, great stuff. We've got Arlette Saenz standing by as well. And frankly, Arlette, the US has been putting a lot of pressure on Netanyahu in terms of the way the government or the IDF is waging the war in Gaza. We've heard those comments. And then, of course, Netanyahu's opposition to the creation of a Palestinian state and what that might mean down the line. We know a lot of conversations are happening behind closed doors. What are you learning right now in terms of the way this is playing out as the international community weighs in, showing its discontent by what Netanyahu had to say?
Well, President Biden said he will continue to try to convince Benjamin Netanyahu to support this two-state solution, even as the Israeli Prime Minister has shown no signs of budging so far. As was mentioned over the weekend, he posted on social media saying that he would not compromise on full Israeli security control in Gaza. And this episode really highlights the latest flashpoint of disagreements between the two men, as we've seen some of those disagreements, that rift, spill into public view, most recently around what happens in Gaza after this conflict ends. Now, Biden and Netanyahu spent about 40 minutes on the phone together on Friday, just one day after Netanyahu appeared to pour cold water on the idea of a Palestinian state. But a source says that during that phone call, Netanyahu told Biden that his comments were not meant to rule out that outcome entirely. The two men spoke in great length and detail about what possible attributes a Palestinian state would have that would still need to be negotiated. One thing the Biden administration officials have been talking about is the potential full demilitarized Palestinian state. That is an idea that is intriguing to President Biden, according to some of his advisors. But after that phone call between Biden and Netanyahu, Biden told reporters that he does still think it's possible that there will eventually be some form of a Palestinian state. But the big question is what exactly that would look like and whether they can actually reach that final outcome, especially as you have Netanyahu publicly speaking out against the idea of a two-state solution. Now, it all comes as the U.S. has very publicly supported Israel, but there has been some frustration bubbling up behind the scenes about the fact that Netanyahu so publicly pushes back on some of America's proposals. And it comes, as Jeremy was outlining, Netanyahu is facing extreme political pressure back at home when it comes to the release of Israeli hostages and also the way that he is waging his campaign against Hamas in Gaza. So all of this really speaks to the challenges President Biden faces as he's trying to apply further pressure on Netanyahu, not just when it comes to a two-state solution, which the U.S. has backed for quite some time, but also when it comes to how he is waging that campaign against Gaza, which has received a lot of pushback from the international community among the deaths of civilians, thousands of civilians there.
Arlette Saenz and Jeremy Diamond for us. Thank you both for that analysis. Well, the conflict's human toll, meantime, becomes more staggering by the day. The Hamas-run health ministry now says more than 25,000 people have been killed in Gaza since October 7th. Israel says 9,000 of the dead are Hamas fighters. And since day one, there have been fears the war could blow up into a regional conflict. Since then, we have seen a ramp up of strikes. Just this weekend, we saw the US striking Houthis, an Iranian-backed militia hitting a US base in Iraq. And Iran's Revolutionary Guard was hit in a suspected Israeli attack on Damascus. The UN envoy for Iran warns the region is at a critical juncture. And of course, there have been those strikes between Israel as well as Lebanon. We've got CNN's Ben Wiedemann in Beirut with a lot more. We're going to talk about the regional spillover and what we've been seeing, and also, importantly, what is happening in Gaza right now. A death toll, Ben, above 25,000. We've seen a 9-day communications blackout. We're starting to see so many images now emerging of what people in Gaza have been experiencing. A lot of harrowing stories coming out. Take me through some of the most significant things you've learned.
Well, there's this sort of 25,000 people dead now in Gaza after 108 days of war is a fairly grisly number, and the numbers are growing. In the last 24 hours, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry, 190 people have been killed. And as we've heard time and time again, the majority of those who are being killed are women and children. Now, we've seen continued displacement with at least 90% of the population now having been moved. Many of them have been moved several times. In fact, we heard from one woman today who said she's had to move 7 times since the beginning of October. And in fact, she probably thinks that they have been moved more. We're continuing to see, for instance, the increase in the numbers of hepatitis A cases in Gaza. According to health officials there, the numbers are up 16 times. There's problems with gastroenteritis, jaundice, skin disease. People are crammed into very much the center and the south of the Gaza Strip. There continue to be shortages of food, of medicine, of water, of basic sanitation. Very little access to clean running water, to showers. So the situation there is, to sum up the situation in Gaza, it is simply catastrophic and only getting worse. Eleni?
Yeah, Ben, it truly is. Some of the stories are really difficult to get a grip on. In terms of what we've been seeing, tensions spilling over into the region. Just this weekend, we have seen strikes coming through. And just to reiterate, the U.S. striking Houthis, Iranian-backed militia hitting U.S. base in Iraq. We saw a strike in Damascus as well. Are we witnessing a full-on spillover into the rest of the region? Because this is the big concern, what it means regionally.
Yeah, what this means is that the war in Gaza has spilled over. I mean, essentially, people are worried about the outbreak of a regional war, but in fact, there's a regional war already going on. Low intensity compared to what's going on in Gaza, but low intensity nonetheless. And what we're seeing, for instance, here in Lebanon, since Sunday, Israel has carried out a series of strikes, one of them near an army checkpoint about 8 kilometers north of the border. That killed several people, including a woman. We understand that Hezbollah has admitted to 3 of its fighters being killed. And of course, on Saturday, there was that Israeli strike. We assume it's an Israeli strike on Damascus, on the residence of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. In that instance, it appears that one of their senior intelligence officials was killed. And as you mentioned, 7 strikes on the Houthis since the United States began its campaign there. And so there is a fear of a real full-blown regional war. Now, there is a solution, of course. The United States could pressure the Israelis to cease fire in Gaza. And what we've seen here in Lebanon is that when there was that 7-day truce, so to speak, while hostages were released and Palestinian detainees were released by Israel, there was no fire from Lebanon. But as long as the war goes on in Gaza and the United States sits on the sidelines, sits on its hands and does nothing in terms of bringing about a ceasefire, the danger of a regional, full-blown regional war comes ever closer. Eleni?
Yeah. Ben Wiedemann, great to have you on. Thank you so much. Well, violence has also been escalating in the West Bank, where a U.S. citizen was fatally shot on Friday. 17-year-old Tawfiq Abdel-Jabbar was buried on Saturday. The circumstances around his death aren't clear. His father says he was driving to a picnic. The Israel Defense Forces says he was throwing stones. Israeli authorities say both an off-duty police officer and an Israeli civilian and Israeli forces were at the scene. But the teen's father blames the U.S., saying that through its support of Israel, it is indirectly responsible. The U.S. State Department is asking Israel for answers. And then there were 2, with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis dropping out of the presidential sweepstakes on Sunday. It is down to former President Donald Trump and former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley for the Republican nomination. And now it's just one day until New Hampshire voters head to the polls. During his announcement, DeSantis also threw his support behind Trump, endorsing the former president.
I have a record of leading with conviction, championing an agenda marked by bold colors, delivering on my promises, and defeating the people who are responsible for our nation's decline. That is the type of leadership we need for all of America. Trump is superior to the current incumbent, Joe Biden. That is clear. I signed a pledge to support the Republican nominee, and I will honor that pledge. He has my endorsement because we can't go back to the old Republican guard of yesteryear, a repackaged form of warmed-over corporatism that Nikki Haley represents. The days of putting Americans last, of kowtowing to large corporations, of caving to woke ideology are over.
Right, well, covering this for us, we've got Jessica Dean in New York City, where the former president is in court today before a campaign rally in New Hampshire tonight. Jessica, great to see you. So much happening. DeSantis is out. Nikki Haley and Trump are going to be, of course, going for it in New Hampshire. But Donald Trump was supposed to be...
Let's see what's on right here.
Your free gift.
Commercial. What's here?
We're over 50.
Another commercial. See what's here.
Results. And by Thursday of last week, this
more.
The other nutrients. Go to the web.
Oh, man.
You think agencies will still continue to rely on words like that in ways that might not, limit our emergency docket?
I'm not so naive to say that overruling Chevron is going to solve all the problems with the emergency docket, but it is going to make it a lot better. Because sure, there's some places where they use appropriate or they try to use modify, which was bold in light of AT&T, but whatever. They pick some of these words that are more capacious. But that broadband case is coming here. That's a case that shouldn't be Chevronized. There's someday somebody's going to litigate whether crypto is an investment contract. Justice Kagan's confident that AI is going to get here because of a statute. I think it's more likely that Congress is going to say, well, there's some scientific officer in Commerce. We'll let them fix the problem. But so my own view of this is it's not a cure-all, but it's going to move things very much in the right direction.
Thank you.
Thank you. General Prelogar, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court. Throughout this litigation and at times this morning, petitioners have sought to characterize this case as presenting a fundamental question of the separation of powers and a test of Article 3. Will courts continue to say what the law is? But I think stepping back, I want to make sure that what doesn't get lost in the shuffle is that petitioners have made an important concession that I think illustrates that the issue here is actually far narrower and that their attacks on Chevron lack merit and are unnecessary. The concession is this: petitioners acknowledge that Congress can expressly delegate to agencies the authority to define statutory terms and fill gaps. Imagine, for example, if the statute said in Chevron, stationary source as defined by the administrator. I take both petitioners to give that up and recognize that is a delegation and courts should respect that. The role of the court in that circumstance is to make sure that the agency has followed the proper procedures and stayed within whatever outer bounds Congress itself has set. And all of that complies with the Constitution, of course, because Congress has Article 1 authority to delegate gap-filling authority to agencies, and the executive has core Article 2 authority to fill in those gaps. That's a core exercise of the executive power. And then the Article 3 courts are just fulfilling their judicial role when they give effect to what Congress has done in its choice to rely on the agency in that regard. But I think what all of this shows is that the constitutional attacks on Chevron and the suggestion that it's egregiously wrong in that regard lack merit, because there is no constitutional distinction between that kind of express delegation and the delegations recognized in Chevron. If Congress can expressly vest an agency with authority to interpret the law through an express delegation, then it can do the same thing implicitly, especially in a world where Congress has to provide the agency with the express authority to carry the statute into operation with the force and effect of law. Now, we can debate, of course, whether Chevron drew the right line in identifying exactly when these delegations have occurred. I think the court got that right for all of the reasons I tried to explain this morning. But I think it's important to recognize that that debate doesn't have a constitutional dimension to it. That falls out of the equation. Instead, it's just a question of whether the court drew the right line in identifying when a delegation has occurred. And if you recognize that, then I think what's left over are the practical concerns that have been raised about Chevron. And I don't want to diminish the force of the concerns that some members of the court have articulated, but I also think that those concerns are manageable. The court could do in this case what it did in Kaiser. It could clarify and articulate the limits of Chevron deference without taking the drastic step of upending decades of settled precedent. And I think that's the right thing to do here. You know, my friends in their briefs both said judges should aspire to be like umpires calling balls and strikes. But stare decisis is part of the rules of the game here too. And in this case, I think all of the stare decisis factors counsel in favor of retaining Chevron. I welcome the court's questions.
How do we discern delegation from statutory silence?
So, Justice Thomas, I think that it would be wrong to suggest that you can neatly categorize cases as those involving silence and those involving ambiguity. And the reason for that, I recognize that Chevron itself used both of those terms, but I think that the court was just trying to be comprehensive about those kinds of circumstances where Congress hasn't itself directly resolved an issue. There's never going to be total silence in a statute. At the very least, the agency is going to have to be able to point to the express delegation of rulemaking authority, the directive directive from Congress to put the statute into effect with the force of law. So that will always be at least a baseline in this context. And then in the mine run case, you'll be able to point to any number of additional features of a statute that help to signal the agency's authority. And actually, this case is the perfect example because my friend said that the Magnuson-Stevenson's Act here is silent on the issue of whether the industry can be required to pay for monitors. But we have 4 different provisions of the Act that we pointed to that undergird the agency's authority. There's the provision that expressly says that the agency can require the vessels to carry the monitors. Then there's the definition of what a monitor is under the statute. It can include a private third party. Then there's the penalty provision that says in a circumstance where the vessel owner has contracted with a private third party and not paid, the agency can penalize. And finally, there's the residual authority to enact necessary and appropriate terms in these fishery management plans. So we don't think that this is a case about silence at all.
General, yeah, that's really good. Again, we're back to the same question the chief had of Mr. Clement. That's a really good statutory interpretation argument. Sounds like exactly the bread and butter of what we do every single day. And we can resolve that, right?
We think that you could find that the statute is clear, but I think that
the fact that you think it's clear and Mr. Clement thinks it's clear, but a court below thought it was ambiguous should tell us something, shouldn't it?
No, I disagree with that. And I should say that I think actually if you look at both what the D.C. Circuit and the First Circuit were doing in these cases, they recognize the force of the arguments. The D.C. Circuit, it's true, and Loper-Bright acknowledged that ultimately it couldn't conclude with confidence that the statute definitely authorized the agency explicitly.
But you think it does.
We think that there is a lot in the statute to,
You think,
support the agency's
yes,
interpretation.
you think you win under step 1, and so does Mr. Clement. And yet, here we are.
I don't think it's at all unusual to find a case where the government thinks it has both the clear interpretation of the statute on its side and that the agency has acted reasonably.
Yeah, because we have this ambiguous ambiguity trigger that nobody knows what it means.
Well,
now, let me just ask you about the delegation, your example in the opening, which is interesting.
Yeah.
I totally understand a statute that does delegate. You know, you make up what rate you think. And that might pose a delegation problem. I'm not, fine. But we know Congress delegated it. That's one thing. What you're asking us to do is infer from a linguistic ambiguity that may not be the product of any intent at all, pulsiver, and might mean or in some circumstances. And infer from that not that we should go to look at statutory context and other clues within the statute.
You know, they got these nice, elegant words.
United States Marine Corps.
Nice, elegant words that they use. That unless you're on top of your game towards understanding all the definitions, all the words, in lots of cases, you can't even understand what they're actually saying. It's a rat race. It's a mess. It's a beehive. It's a cesspool.
To then give her some momentum.
Well, the problem is it's not half, right? And again, there's this interesting question that we pollsters often.
All right, let's go to one other thing here, and then we're going to let it go. Right here on the weather.
Rain, you have the ice. It's just, it's not good. St. Louis, you're going to have a ton of problems on the roads. I actually do want to open up your actual real field temperatures because they're going to be in the teens and 20s. So it's going to feel really cold today, and you're going to have the icing problems on the roads today.
And it's not just there that we're going to have the icing problems, also Chicago. We're starting off as snow, but then we're going to turn over to ice. So that's when it's going to be the tricky travel concerns are going to come into play. So just make sure you are staying weather wear. It's yucky.
All right, Barry is the decision maker
Come
today.
on,
Barry. Yeah, I think it was St. Louis.
I think it was.
I think that one's pretty bad.
At CarShield, we know.
Safety. When the power goes.
The alternative for Germany and its anti-immigrant policies that many Germans say are similar to the Nazis.
Durch Deutschland ein Riesenrechtsruck. Germany is undergoing a huge shift to the right, just as it was almost before the war, or before the Second World War. And I don't think it's ever been this bad since the war.
The AfD struck a nerve with many Germans after it was revealed that senior party members attended a secret meeting last year of neo-Nazis and other extremists and discussed plans for mass deportation of migrants, including German citizens. The AfD denies it is a racist or extremist group and denies such plans are part of their policy, although calls to ban the party are growing. But it has also recorded high polling in some states and is expected to make gains in regional and perhaps European elections this year, something protesters say needs to change.
I hope that it will make people change their minds. Some may not yet be sure whether they will vote for the AfD or not, but after these demonstrations, they simply can't do that anymore.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has encouraged people to join the protests, saying extremism in the country is a threat to democracy and a throwback to a time of hatred and violence.
If there is something in Germany which must never ever find a place again, it is the national race ideology of the Nazis. The repulsive relocation plans by these extremists is just that.
Michael Holmes, CNN.
Well, coming up on Connect the World, the backlash grows over Benjamin Netanyahu's controversial comments on Palestinian statehood. One of the best-sourced Israeli journalists, Barak Raviv, joins us now to discuss. We'll be right back.
That's going to do us for today. Thank you for listening. Good luck to all of us. I want to say God bless America. God bless our troops. Heaven help us all, as we can obviously see where these disruptions and these upsetting events are only escalating rather than de-escalating. I want to pray for the people over in the Holy Land pertaining to those who are doing so much suffering, pertaining to humanitarian aid. Want to pray for the Ukrainians. Want to pray for the world in general, all over the world, pertaining to so much suffering and so much evil that's being right now exposed, including right here in America. Want to pray for the elderly, pray for the children, pray for the sick, pray for the defenseless, pray for our leadership that we will get back on the right track towards doing the right thing in the eyes of the Almighty. Want to thank you. God bless you. And shalom.